The prairie wind blew low that evening, brushing the grass like a hush passing through a chapel. In the dimming light, with the sun dipping behind the ridges of the west, Clara Duval stood on the porch of her modest homestead, alone as she'd been for 7 long years. She had long stopped waiting for someone to come down the dusty road. Her hands were calloused from work, baking, stitching, feeding chickens, patching leaks. Her heart, though tender, had learned not to ask for much. Life in Maple Hollow didn't offer second chances, especially not to women past their childbearing years, or so the whispers said. She had no husband, no children, but she had peace, and she had her land. That night, as she prepared to boil water for tea and wrap up her mending, a strange sound came through the quiet. A knock. Not loud, just desperate. Clara opened the door to find a man she did not recognize. He was tall, thin from hardship, with dark curls matted to his brow and dust clinging to his coat. But it wasn't him that caught her eyes. It was the small bundle clutched tightly to his chest. "A baby," she whispered. The man nodded, his lips cracked from sun and wind. "She hasn't eaten in almost a day," he said, voice hoarse. "I was told you might have something, anything." Clara's heart stuttered. She hadn't heard a baby cry in years, but this one, swaddled in a gray blanket and sobbing softly, awakened something fierce and maternal in her. She thought was buried for good. "I don't sell milk," she said gently, "but I do have something better." The man blinked, confused. "Better?" Clara stepped aside and gestured inside. "Come in before the chill sets in. Let me help her." The cabin was simple but warm. The stove gave off a soft glow, and the rocking chair by the hearth looked suddenly like a cradle of hope. Clara unbuttoned her bodice slowly and carefully. "I never had children," she said, noticing his startled look. "But I helped raise my sisters when she passed. There's a way, if the child is young enough and the heart strong enough." She picked up the baby with a tenderness that stunned him, and then, as if her body had waited for this moment, this purpose, the baby rooted against her chest and began to nurse. The man looked away, jaw trembling, hands clenched. Clara watched him. "What's your name?" He cleared his throat. Luke Harlan, she's Grace." Clara looked down at the child, now quiet in her arms, wrapped in warmth and rhythm. "You brought her here, Luke. That was the bravest thing you could have done." That night, Luke stayed by the fire, unsure if he was welcome, unsure of anything anymore. But Clara sat across from him, holding Grace as if she'd held her 100 times before. And as the wind howled through the plains outside, inside the cabin was stillness. Not silence, stillness. The kind that settles when something lost is finally found. By morning, the frost had melted from the window panes, leaving behind trails like veins across glass. Like the map of a journey no one had planned. Inside the cabin, the scent of oats and firewood mingled in the air. Clara stirred the pot slowly, her eyes flickering now and then to the corner where Luke sat holding baby Grace with 2 hands. Not because she was heavy, but because he wasn't ready to let her go. "She didn't cry once last night," he said softly, as if not to break whatever spell Clara had placed over the child. "She needed warmth," Clara replied. "And so did you." He looked up but couldn't meet her eyes. "I should go." The words fell like stones. Clara set the spoon down gently. "Go where, Luke? You said you came from West Ridge. That's 2 days away. You walked here with nothing but a child and a coat too thin for winter." Luke stood, rocking the baby slightly. "I don't mean to be trouble." "You're not." "I didn't come to stay." She raised an eyebrow. "Didn't you?" He hesitated. "I came because someone told me you were kind, that you helped women, children, anyone who needed it." Clara walked closer. Her voice was calm, but her eyes burned like the stove. "I help who asks for it, and you asked. That's more than most men I've met." Luke shifted on his feet. Grace squirmed, but didn't cry. She simply turned her cheek into her father's chest, completely unaware of the weight of his guilt. "I couldn't keep her fed," he admitted. "Her mother passed in the spring. Fever. I didn't even know how to boil milk." Clara nodded. "Most men don't. They learn when they have to." He looked at her then. Really looked. And for a moment, all the tired in his face fell away, leaving something raw and unguarded. Not hope. Not yet. But the seed of it. Later that afternoon, Clara sat on the porch steps, sewing a patch on a blanket. Luke was chopping kindling at the edge of her yard. He was careful not to get too close to the house, like a man afraid to trespass on peace. She didn't interrupt him. But when he returned with an armful of logs and placed them near her stack, she said, "You can sleep in the barn tonight if you want. It's warmer than walking into the dark." He nodded once. "And Luke?" He turned. If you go, go because you choose to, not because you think you're not welcome. He didn't answer, but his eyes softened. That night Clara fed Grace again, her own body adjusting, responding. As if love had awoken something long dormant in her. She wasn't just feeding a child. She was healing herself. And out in the barn, under a roof of stars and hay, Luke lay awake, listening to the wind, and wondering for the first time in a long time what it might feel like to stop running. The sun rose pale the next morning, trailing its light across Clara's fields like a golden ribbon laid gently over winter's breath. In the stillness, baby Grace gurgled softly as Clara rocked her by the fire, humming an old lullaby that hadn't crossed her lips in years. Luke stepped quietly into the cabin, having washed up at the creek. His coat was damp, his boots muddied, but his eyes looked clearer, like a man who'd finally found something worth standing still for. Clara glanced over her shoulder. You're early. Didn't sleep much. You're not used to peace. He cracked a smile. I guess not. Breakfast was simple. Cornbread, beans, and a few dried apples. Clara set the table like it was just another morning, though her hands trembled slightly when she poured Luke his coffee. It had been a long time since she'd had a man sit across from her like that. Luke took a sip and looked around the room. It's warm here. I try. No, I mean, it feels like the kind of place a man doesn't just pass through. Clara's hand stilled on her fork. He cleared his throat. I used to dream about that. A place where Grace could grow up without fearing the next cold night or wondering when the next meal would come. She could, Clara said, if you wanted. He stared at her. Are you offering? I'm offering time, that's all. Later, Luke helped Clara repair a fence along the pasture. As they worked side by side, she noticed how carefully he handled the tools, not with the skill of a rancher, but with the precision of someone afraid to break what wasn't his. You're gentle, she said. He chuckled. I carry an axe, Clara. Even an axe can build, not just cut. By late afternoon, snow began to drift lazily through the sky, light and harmless, like the world whispering that not all storms bring ruin. Clara brought out a second blanket and wrapped Grace tighter as Luke sat near the hearth. She's stronger already, he murmured, watching his daughter's tiny hands curl and stretch. She knows she's safe now. Because of you. Clara's voice was soft. Because of us, Luke. He looked at her, long and steady, and then down at the baby. I never thought I'd say this, he whispered. But maybe we don't have to go back. Clara nodded slowly. No, she agreed. Maybe you finally found the place you don't have to leave. In that moment, it wasn't a question of charity or pity. It wasn't about milk or mercy. It was about family. The kind born not from blood, but from the courage to stay. And for the first time since Spring took his wife, Luke smiled without apology. The storm that arrived the next morning wasn't a blizzard. It was gentler than that. A slow rolling snow that blanketed the homestead in quiet. Luke stood at the barn door, baby Grace bundled against his chest, watching the sky fall in soft flakes. Clara stepped outside beside him, her shawl wrapped tight. Storm like this, she said, used to mean loneliness. He glanced down at her. And now? Clara looked up at him. Now it means we stay inside and stay together. They stood that way a while, silent, not needing to say the things already known. Inside, Grace was fed and warm again, curled in Clara's arms as she hummed a hymn Luke didn't recognize. Her voice wasn't polished. It was steady, like the beat of someone who'd spent years holding it all together for no one but herself. He watched from across the room. There was no reason to still be guarded, but Luke had never known how to stop bracing for loss. She's smiling, Clara said softly. Luke stepped forward. She doesn't do that much. She does now. Later, while Grace napped in a cradle Luke had helped carve that morning, rough-hewn but solid, Clara poured warm water into a basin and handed Luke a razor. Shave, she said simply. He blinked. Why? Because if you're going to stay here, I want to see the man I've been talking to, not the ghost of the one who left West Ridge. He hesitated. You think there's a man worth seeing? She didn't smile. She didn't tease. She just said, I know there is. That night, with the wind knocking gently at the shutters, they sat across from one another with mugs of coffee and no more questions between them. Luke finally asked, Why did you help me? Really? Clara leaned back, eyes on the fire. Because once, a long time ago, I prayed for a child I never had. And when she didn't come, I thought the world was done offering me anything soft. Her eyes found his. But then a man knocked at my door. He looked like trouble. He had nothing to give. But he brought me something I never thought I'd see again. Luke's throat tightened. What's that? A reason to set 2 extra plates. In the quiet after, Grace stirred once in her sleep and let out a tiny sigh, like the kind of sound only babies and hearts finally at rest can make. Luke looked over, eyes misting, then back at Clara. "You ever think," he said softly, "that sometimes the baby isn't the only one who's saved?" By the end of the week, the snow was knee-deep and glittering beneath a pale sun, turning the world into a hush of white and wonder. Inside Clara's home, warmth radiated from the stone hearth, and the scent of baked bread drifted through the air. Luke cradled Grace on one arm while whittling with the other. Nothing special, just a small wooden bird. Clara watched him from across the room, a basket of mending in her lap she'd barely touched for 10 minutes. She was learning something new about herself. The sound of family could distract her more than loneliness ever did. "I've been thinking," Luke said quietly, never looking up from his carving. "Dangerous thing for a man," Clara teased. He grinned, then glanced up. "I want to build her something. A crib. Proper. She's outgrowing that basket." Clara's eyes softened. "We'll build it together." He paused. "We?" She nodded, then added gently, "Unless you're planning to leave before the sawdust settles." Luke set the carving knife down. "I've done a lot of leaving in my life, Clara, but this time—" He reached over and took her hand, not boldly, but with reverence. "I'd rather learn what it means to stay." The days passed like pages in a diary. Neither of them knew they'd started. Grace laughed more often. Clara hummed without realizing it. Luke smiled with less effort. They chopped wood together, fixed the fence, and when a neighbor passed by with word of a spring trading post reopening in town, Luke offered to make the trip. "You trust me to go and come back?" he asked her on the porch that morning. Clara looked him square in the eye. "I trust you with my stove, my barn, my baby. Why not my heart, too?" Luke said nothing at first, but his thumb brushed the back of her hand, just once, slow and sure. And then he said, "Then I'll be back before the biscuits cool." He returned that same evening, with flour, medicine, bolts of cloth, and a surprise, a delicate hairbrush for Grace, and a small tin brooch shaped like a sunflower for Clara. Clara turned the gift over in her hand, speechless. "It's not much," Luke said, sheepish. "It's everything," she replied. That night, after Grace had fallen asleep, Clara stood by the fire brushing her hair for the first time in months. Luke stepped close. "You know," he said quietly, "back in West Ridge, they used to say I'd never amount to much." Clara turned. "They were wrong." He nodded slowly. "I know that now." His voice was low, steady, "because of you." She didn't kiss him then. He didn't ask her to, but their hands touched. Just fingertips, just enough. Enough to say I'm here. Enough to mean I'm not going anywhere. The days grew longer. Winter loosened its grip. Grace began to crawl, her tiny hands patting across the floor with determination, chasing after the wooden bird her father had carved. Each little laugh she let out filled the cabin with something Clara had never dared to name. Joy, not the kind that burns fast and bright and vanishes, but the kind that settles deep, quiet and warm, like embers that never die. Luke fixed the roof before the first spring rain. Clara mended his shirts with care she pretended was casual. They still slept apart, him in the barn by choice, her in the house by habit. But every day the space between them shrank by another heartbeat. Neighbors started to notice. A few even dropped by. "You taking in strays now, Clara?" One old man chuckled from his wagon. Clara only smiled. "No, I'm taking in purpose." One morning, as Clara washed laundry by the creek, Grace playing in the grass nearby, Luke came walking from the tree line with a freshly trapped rabbit slung over his shoulder and something uncertain in his expression. "You all right?" Clara asked, standing. He nodded, then paused. "I want to ask you something." She blinked. "You sound like you're about to propose." He looked her in the eye. "I am." Clara's breath caught. "What?" Luke stepped closer. "Not marriage. Not yet. I know better than to rush a woman like you." Her heart thudded. "I'm asking if I can move inside, into the house, into your days, into Grace's life. Fully. As her father. And maybe someday is more than just that to you. More than..." Clara looked down at the suds floating in the wash basin, then up at the man who had shown up half-starved with nothing but a baby and a broken soul, and had slowly built something with her that neither of them had the words for yet. "You don't need to ask," she said softly. "But I want to," he replied. "Because love, real love, always knocks." That night, Luke moved his things into the house. Grace clapped. Clara didn't cry. Not then. But when the lamp was low and the wind was gentle, and she felt his breathing nearby as he slept in the other room, she did weep, quietly, gratefully. Because her home was no longer just four walls. It was a life, a family, and love had come. Not loud, not dramatic, but in small, faithful footsteps. Spring brought color back to the land. Soft greens, wildflower yellows, and a sky so blue it seemed to wash away everything that had ever been hard. The hills bloomed, and so did something inside the little home on the prairie. Clara had lived through many springs, but never one like this. Never with a baby asleep in her arms. Never with the quiet comfort of a man mending fence posts outside and calling in, "I'll be done before supper." Luke didn't make grand declarations. He didn't know how. But each morning he made coffee first and left the biggest slice of cornbread for Clara. He washed the basin after she bathed Grace. He carved wooden animals for the baby and a rocking chair for Clara, even though his hands blistered shaping every curve. He never said "I love you," not with words, but everything he touched said it. One afternoon, while Clara stitched Grace's name into a new quilt, Luke came in with mud on his boots and an idea on his lips. "There's land just east of here," he said, pulling out a folded map. "We could add to the garden. More squash, maybe some beans. You'd like that." Clara looked at the map, then at him. "You're thinking long-term." He nodded. "Ain't that what families do?" She swallowed hard. "You think this is a family?" He hesitated. "I don't think, I know." Clara smiled, slowly, deeply. "Then plant whatever you like, Luke Harlan. You're home." The next few weeks passed like a song sung low and true. Grace took her first steps between Clara's arms and Luke's calloused hands. Luke built a swing from an old oak tree, and Clara, on a late Sunday morning, walked to the mirror, looked at her reflection, the lines, the gray, the wisdom, and whispered, "I'm not too old for love. I was just waiting for the right shape of it." That night, Luke stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching Clara rock Grace to sleep. "You know what I was most afraid of when I first knocked on your door?" Clara looked up. "That you'd send me away." "I never even considered it," she said. "Why not?" She kissed Grace's head, tucked the blanket around her, and stood slowly. "Because sometimes God sends us what we didn't ask for, but needed more than breath." And in the soft light of a single lantern, with the floor creaking beneath their steps and the wind gently tapping the shutters, Luke kissed Clara for the first time, not rushed, not desperate, but full of the promise that everything lost could one day be found again. The seasons turned again. By summer, the cabin no longer felt like Clara's place alone. It was filled with laughter, footprints, and the scent of warm bread and pine wood. Grace now toddled around on sturdy legs, dragging her wooden bird behind her. Luke had added a new porch swing, and Clara spent her mornings there, rocking gently with the child in her lap and a book she rarely read, too content watching life unfold. One morning, Luke stepped inside carrying a small envelope. He looked nervous. "I got a letter," he said. Clara set down her tea. "From where?" "West Ridge. It's from Judge Hartley." Her spine straightened slightly. "Are you in trouble?" "No," he said quickly. "Just remembered." He handed her the envelope. "It's Grace's birth certificate. I never registered her after everything." Clara's fingers grazed the edge of the paper. "It doesn't say mother," he said quietly. "I was going to leave it blank, but I thought maybe it didn't have to stay that way." Clara looked up sharply. "You want me to?" Luke stepped forward. "I want her to have the name of the woman who held her first when she was truly safe. The one who taught her to eat and to laugh. The one who never left." He pulled a small ink pen from his pocket. "If you want to, I'd like you to be her mother. Not just in practice, but in truth." Clara's hands trembled as she took the pen, and slowly, with care, she wrote her name, Clara Duval Harlan, into the empty space beside Mother's name. They didn't speak much that afternoon. Didn't need to. Luke worked on the shed. Clara fed Grace her applesauce. And the world somehow shifted into a deeper peace. That night, under a canopy of stars and fireflies, Luke brought something out from behind the barn. It was a carved wooden sign, still rough around the edges. The letters read, Harlan Homestead. Clara touched the wood, breath caught. "You think it's too much?" Luke asked. She shook her head, eyes bright. "I think it's just enough." He took her hand and kissed it. "I know we're not married, but I've loved you since the second night. The first, I was too scared." Clara laughed softly. "And I've loved you since you offered to build a crib instead of running." Luke took a breath. "Will you marry me, Clara?" Her answer wasn't a word. She simply stepped into his arms and held him, like she'd never let him go. The wedding wasn't grand. There were no carriages, no corsets, no choir. Just the meadow out back, dressed in wildflowers and sun. Just a few neighbors gathered with quiet smiles and rough hands. Just Clara in a dress she'd sewn herself, and Luke in his best shirt, still smelling faintly of cedar. And Grace, toddling between them, a ribbon in her curls and crumbs on her cheeks from the pie she'd stolen early. The preacher asked them the usual questions, but Luke interrupted before he could finish. "I don't need a script," he said, voice steady. "Clara fed my child when I couldn't. She gave me a roof when all I had was wind. And every day since, she's taught me what it means to build instead of run." He turned to her fully. "I don't vow to love you forever. I vow to love you daily, because forever's made of little pieces like today." Clara wiped a tear from her cheek and laughed. "You always did say things sideways, Luke Harlan." Then she took his hands. "I never thought I'd marry," she said. "Not at this age. Not with this past. But you didn't come looking for a bride. You came looking for help, and somehow we helped each other back to life." She leaned in. "So here's my vow. I'll keep the stove warm, the coffee hot, the stories honest, and the porch light on, even if you're just 10 feet away." And the crowd chuckled, soft and heartfelt. The rings were simple. Twine for now until Luke could afford silver. But the moment was whole. They didn't dance, not really. But later that evening, with Grace asleep and fireflies blinking over the fields, Luke pulled Clara close on the porch. "Do you regret any of it?" he asked. Clara leaned her head against his chest. "Only that it took this long." From that night on, the Harlan homestead was more than a house. It was a place where a broken man found forgiveness, where a forgotten woman found purpose, and where a child, born in silence, was raised in so much love she would never question her worth. Not all Western romances are about gunfights or riches. Some are about showing up again and again, with a bottle of milk, with a hammer, with a hand that knows how to hold, and a heart brave enough to stay. The rains came early that autumn, soft but steady, soaking the earth and painting the fields in tones of rust and amber. Inside the Harlan homestead, Clara hung herbs from the ceiling, and Grace, now a wild giggle on 2 feet, chased her father's bootsteps like a puppy chasing its shadow. Luke had built a woodshed, then added a chicken coop, then started drawing out plans for a second room. "You planning for more children?" Clara teased one evening as they lay side by side, hands clasped beneath the quilts. "Maybe," he said with a grin. "Or maybe I just like building where love lives." The town began to change its opinion of Clara. She was no longer the lonely woman with the big heart. She was Mrs. Harlan now, respected, listened to. Even the pastor's wife asked her for bread recipes and parenting advice. And Luke, who had once walked into town as the man with nothing, became the man others trusted. He taught fence mending to boys, helped repair the roof of the schoolhouse, and once even stepped in to stop a fistfight between 2 ranchers. He didn't do it for praise. He did it because he knew what it meant to have no one. That winter, Clara fell ill with a bad cold. Not dangerous, but enough to keep her in bed for days. Luke never left her side. He fed Grace, burned half the stew, and even tried to braid Clara's hair while she laughed herself into a coughing fit. "I look like a rooster," she wheezed. "You look like my heart," he said simply. And just like that, her fever broke by morning. Spring came again, then another, and soon Grace wasn't the only child toddling around the kitchen. A second baby, a boy named Samuel, born under the whispering cottonwoods, arrived with lungs strong and eyes soft like his mother's. Clara held him one quiet night with Luke at her shoulder and Grace asleep beside them. "I never imagined all this," she whispered. "You didn't have to," Luke said, resting his forehead to hers. "You just had to open the door." And she had. To milk, to Grace, to a stranger with nothing but a baby and a prayer. And now she had everything. Not riches, not fame, but something better. A forever kind of love that began with a knock and never left.